Hello, everyone. I am Melissa Forziat. I'm a keynote speaker and the host of this Halt and Catch Fire rewatch podcast. Now, when I speak, my topic is something that I call Take the Doughnut, which for me is another way to say carpe diem. It's all about going after the things you want in life. Something that I wanted to do this year was to rewatch the show Halt and Catch Fire, but this time actually talk about it with other people, which I had never really been able to do before. So that has been a blast, but we've up-leveled that because now I'm getting a chance to talk with people who worked on the show. And before I introduce my interview guest for today, just a quick housekeeping item. If you are brand new to the show Halt and Catch Fire, and you want to keep it spoiler free up until the episode that you're on, go to those recap episodes because that's where I try to keep it spoiler free up until the episode named in the subject. If you are new to the show and you come to these interviews, we could mention anything that happens in any season of the show. So just be aware of that up front. This could be spoiler filled, probably will be spoiler filled for this one in particular. So just know that. But having said all of that, I am so excited to talk with my guest today, who is Jennifer Bryan, who was the costume designer from season 4. Welcome, Jennifer.
Hi, Melissa. It's so great to finally make contact with you.
I am so excited. We've made this happen. Jennifer has been busy with projects, which is what we want to hear because it's, what a past few years it's been.
Oh, yes. So I'm blessed. Yes.
Absolutely. And I guess I want to give a little special intro here for what you do in particular, because I guess I need to apologize to you because I have the worst eye for like the visual details of what people are wearing and even often set design. And so that has been severely underrepresented in my deep dives, the takes about what, the attire that people have on, the costumes that people have on. So we need you. Like maybe more than anybody, we need your voice here to really unpack some of the things that you put onto screen. But I guess before we do that, how did you get connected with this show to begin with?
Well, it was really serendipity. I was I think it was my third season, I believe, of Better Call Saul. And Melissa Bernstein, who is one of the executive producers of Better Call Saul, is also the executive producer of Halt and Catch Fire. And it was going into the 4th season. They needed a costume designer. And the timing was perfect because it was just in between the hiatus of the end of Better Call Saul going into the next season. So I was able to jump on board, went down to Atlanta, did a quick study, and it just dovetailed into my hiatus from Better Call Saul. So I was able to do that full season 4. Yes. And it was wonderful just to get an opportunity to do another project in between my regular show that was quite different from what I was doing in a different time frame and everything else. So yeah, that's how I got on the show.
This is amazing. So that sounds like you would have not had a huge window of time,
No,
especially for the prep for this. So how long before, let's say, the 4th season started to film were you brought in?
Literally, it was weeks. I had just enough time to do a quick study, watch the previous 3 seasons. It was a mad dash, but listen, sometimes part of being a costume designer is that you have to do a lot of things on roller skates, probably more often with roller skates on than off. So I had worked in Atlanta before, so I was pretty familiar with the city, and having Melissa on board and meeting some new writers and producers and sort of like meeting extensions of that production family was really very supportive for me. So yeah. But it was fast. It was fast and furious.
That is light speed. So how do you prep for something like that? Especially because for those of us who know the show, you know that the show is reinventing itself every season. So even if you go back and you watch, I don't know if that's actually great prep for going into the next season, but what kind of things did you do in that really short window of time to get ready for this project?
Well, I had a lot of episodes, had all 3 seasons that I had to watch and rewatch, and learned story and really learning the backstory to these characters, and also getting some advance, in the first few episodes for season 4, how the story was going to break, and how the characters were going to change. So it was actually a pretty good. It wasn't like a clean break, because you don't want that on a television show. You want to have continuum, but you also need to have some freshness if the beginning of the season calls for it, because a lot of times, as you know, seasons have cliffhangers, and then you have to kind of transform that into something fresh in your episodes 1 and 2, and going forward, if that's how long sometimes it takes just one episode to break it into something fresh, or sometimes the story will take you over maybe the first 2 or 3 episodes. Depends on how the writers, craft their script. But in short, I had to had to watch those 3 seasons repeatedly, get a fairly quick and deep understanding of characters, and then some advanced information as to what their journey was going to be for the season that I was going to design. So there's that. And then a lot of shopping, a lot of meetings. And then starting, once actors have been re-signed for the upcoming seasons, then I get them for fittings. So that's how it worked. But I would think I probably had about a 4-week, somewhere between 4 and 6 weeks prep, which is not a lot of time. But if you have good support, have great teams that I work with, we got it done just under the wire.
You started to paint a bit of a picture for us with that answer, but what are some of the tasks involved for your role as costume designer? But I mean, both in prep, but also once filming starts and you're getting into the script by script, episode by episode experience. What are you doing day to day? What are those tasks?
Well, in the early phase of prepping, I am, after I've gone through, especially if it's a show that has already been running, like in the case of Halt and Catch Fire, I will start to do mood boards. I will start to develop a color story for each character. And in the case of mostly on the female characters, a kind of a style silhouette line. I also do it for the men, but for the women, as you can imagine, it's a wider berth because women have more clothes, more style, more options. Then present that in costume presentation meetings, get some direction, make sure I'm going in the right direction of how the directors and writers see it. And I felt that they were very welcoming and open to some of these newer ideas that I had. So that's kind of the first thing. And in the background, there is, I have, besides myself, would have an assistant, supervisor, and some buyers, and we are out shopping and scouring for clothing, and essentially what we call building closets for each actor. So it can be things that we shop, it might be things that I build. I'd be like, just any and everywhere I need to find clothing and pieces that fit into the story. That's sort of like the core in those early weeks of prep. Then after that, we start to have fittings, because now I've built a closet enough to have maybe Catherine Newton come in for a fitting, and I've got a closet of things that will take us through the first few episodes to kind of build up her look and her style. And I do this consecutively for all the actors, and it's not necessarily just your main cast, also your day players and your minor I wouldn't want to say minor, but your lesser characters. Every single person that is on screen that has clothes on, I am responsible for that, and to make it look seamless and that they belong in this, in the same world. So that's sort of like the challenge. It's busy, but it's a lot of multitasking going on at the same time.
It's a huge task, and we're going to get into some of the many different types of characters that had to make sure had clothing on in their scenes. When you think about this show and you compare it to other, especially TV shows that you've worked on, because you've done so many, in what ways was working on this show different? What stands out to you with this one?
I think what stood out to it was that it had a very narrow focus about a specific time in the lives, in our lifespan, right? That was very, very impactful going forward. And it's like watching something develop in terms of personal computing, the beginning of what I would call the internet age and the digital age, that you knew. It's so interesting because the story that we're working on Halt and Catch Fire is literally the beginning of the medium that we're using to tell the story of Halt and Catch Fire. I mean, that is unusual. It's almost like sci-fi, except the sci-fi was real. So that was just fascinating to me, to be in a thing that was a prequel to a thing that made the work that I do, it made it possible to be able to transmit it and to show it all over the world. If it were not for the storylines of those characters, where would we be now with our iPads and our internet and our AI and all of that? That's fascinating.
That's the thing that always kills me when people say, why would people want to watch a show about people who make computers? And then I think to myself, because we use everything that they're creating.
Exactly.
Who has not put their hands on something that's being invented in this show and actually physically used it? I think it's just so relevant. And yet it's a contemporary period piece. So you have to sort of combine all of that in the work that you do. Did you have any favorite characters to dress?
They were all my favorites for one reason or another.
It's very diplomatic.
No, seriously, each one of our key characters brought their own special vibe that then I in turn vibed on. And I like to think that we ended up in a really good stylistic place. I would say for fashion, because that's also another aspect of my craft, I would say Carrie Bichet's clothing and her style, and that razor sharp kind of almost like the devil wears Prada in computer science, and that attitude that she had, that was just a great personality that could carry off that edge. So that was something that I really liked about being able to make her really pop and be elevated above everybody else, where she's really adhering to this kind of sharp businesswoman, dress code, and everybody is much, much more relaxed. And then let's talk about
her a little bit more, because that was actually the first character that I had on my list to talk about. Her character in particular is maybe the most changed coming into this season from where she was in season 3. She's the most ruthless we've ever seen her. That's how she starts. And then there's going to be a considerable shift again towards the end of the season after Gordon dies.
Right.
So, like, if you can think specifically about how you approached, like, it's sort of two Donnas that you have to dress in season 4, and both of them are different from any previous Donna. In what
Mhm.
ways did you reflect that in her costuming?
Well, in going back and looking back on how she was presented in early seasons and the early beginnings of her development, she was really kind of like wife, mother, and playing second fiddle to Gordon, although we could see that she was heads and tails above him in terms of her alacrity in grasping what was going on in personal computing. She was sharper, but she played it down. And you saw that in her clothing. She was really kind of like, she was trying to kind of keep it bottled in to give him room to shine. But eventually, with I think with strong women, at some point they're gonna break out. And that's what she did. And she evolved into something that I think that she was trying to suppress once she got that opportunity, and she, her career kind of takes off, and he's still kind of struggling, holding on to what I would think, I mean, I'm not a writer, but almost like he's holding on to the ideals and the romanticism of building something in his garage, and she is ready to just like get up to the corner suite. And so what happens is that what I did is I had to, as she became stronger, then I concurrently ramped up her style to higher and higher to where she really looks like she could just run all of Silicon Valley. And that was sort of like where we wanted her to be. So yeah, that is definitely um, one of the clearest and the most defined visual and costume trajectory you can see it in her. And then on the other end of the scale, I would say Susanna Stagg's character, where she is, she's a young girl and she's struggling to find her sexual identity and trying to be as forthright as her sister is, and coming up from under that. So while her mom's going up, she's going this way and going away from the norm. So those are like the two opposites in terms of style and storytelling with costumes that
Yeah,
I think stood out in the show.
it's a really nice contrast that you brought up there. With Donna's closet, were there any particular designers or styles that you tended to sort of go to more regularly with her?
Yeah, Ted Baker. Ted Baker was doing a really great line and silhouette at the time. And she just fit perfectly into that. I remember that one particular label that I used it a lot. Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. I love that. Um, you know, let's talk a little bit about Cameron's an interesting one here because she's been living in Japan for about for years now. And so that probably is going to have some sort of an influence. She had a very
Mm-hmm.
specific style before she moved to Japan. It has evolved a bit over the first 3 seasons, but then we off screen we know that she's been living in another country for a while now. So, you know, and on top of that, she comes back to California, but she's not really reintegrated. She's very isolated as a character. She spends time with Joe, but even then, she chooses to live in an airstream away from
That's
the
true.
city. So she like it's hard to know. She's not really part of a community here. What were you highlighting about her with the way you chose to dress her?
Okay, so in the first previous season, she certainly was um, a little bit a little bit disorganized, a little bit ragtag. She'd probably wear the same old ring t-shirt for God knows how long, and really the hair was tousled and not really caring. She didn't put too much attention into her personal dress. Something happens when she goes to Japan. I think she had to find her way and become, you definitely see she gets a little bit more pulled together. I started putting her, in like tailored trousers. And I remember there was a really great camel coat that I put on her. And then there's that amazing scene where she's on the phone with Joe in that long, I don't know, 8-hour long telephone conversation. And she's in that really cuddly navy blue sweater. But I just like the coziness of it that I put in. But then you just saw her beautiful long legs laid out, curled up on the bed. And I felt it gave a message of wanted to reconnect back with this person who she truly loves, but making it like a really long telephone call so she's not able to like touch him and feel him and have physical contact. But I just thought that was like a really, really great scene. And, Mackenzie and I went through quite a bit in terms of clothing, how to make that transition from Japan back home. And I did take some notes from thinking that while she was there, she might have been influenced by the minimalism and the tonal quality in Japanese women's wear. So I kept her like for a while, like in navies and beiges, and kind of cleaned her up, her character-wise, not cleaning her up, but clean up her lines a little bit more to kind of give you a connection to while she was there, she was indeed influenced by the simplicity of how people lived and what they wore. So she got a little bit more pulled together, but she still was, I feel, in conflict in integrating herself back into California and into Joe's life, and back into the business, because she's torn.
Yeah, so many interesting notes there. And then, as we think about Joe, he's really coming out of what appears to be a long period of depression. That maybe never stopped since Bryan died at the end of season 3. He's slowly finding balance again in his life, especially when Cam comes back into it. And particularly when Comet becomes a factor as a work project. In what ways were you showing his evolution?
Well, if you noticed, I kept him in this amazing, I think it was a John Varvatos leather jacket. And I felt he needed a little armoring, as he was trying to also get himself in balance of what was to come and having to deal with this person that he's torn. He's torn between his love of her and his need to be ruthlessly successful. And so what I did, I kept him in, and Lee really liked the idea that I kept him in this leather jacket that looked like he was never ever going to get out of it, because it was like his armor, his protection for all this stuff that was going around him, sort of like a stabilizing force. And if you look back on a lot of scenes, it's like zipped up, and you really don't even see too much of like what he's wearing underneath. So we kind of did that. And then when she moves into the Airstream, I did something very subtle, at least I think it was subtle, is that he has on his clothing in the Airstream when he's making cheese eggs that morning. His clothing is lighter. He has on like white cotton slacks, and I think it was a t-shirt, but definitely a lighter tone from the black leather jacket, so that there was some optimism there, and you could see that he's really kind of resolving that he does indeed love this woman, and whatever she wants, he wants that for her. So we made color shifts, and that's one of the things that I also do in storytelling with costumes is color is an important tool to tell a story, to make a shift in direction. It's subtle. You don't notice it at once, but I always believe that your brain registers it.
Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to colors that you were choosing, was there conversation with any other visual departments in the show, like production design or anything
Oh,
where
yeah.
okay.
Oh,
Were
yeah,
there
absolutely.
notes about what you were trying to achieve across departments?
Mm-hmm. So always, at the beginning of an episode, and especially if we're going into like a new location or a new scene, I would always touch base with the production designer, Ola Maslik, and we had really great communication to make sure that, the office room was going to be, what tone was she going to use, the sofas, the cushions, the curtains, everything, so that when my actor comes in and is in whatever wardrobe we have selected, that there's a harmony, that he or she looks like she belongs in that environment. So yeah, we did that a lot. I mean, we would always communicate. I mean, we would go down to paint colors on the wall. Yeah, that's how detailed and really how collaborative you have to be in television production.
Yeah, it's just incredible. Let's talk a little bit about Gordon, who seems to be the most stable of the characters since season 3, especially at the start of season 4. That is, up until he dies.
Mm-hmm.
What goals did you have for his character's costuming?
I think the writers, Melissa, myself, wanted him to not go too far afield in his look, and to have him sort of like your everyday guy. I had him in chinos, I had him in plaid shirt. The only time you really saw him kind of really dressed up was when he had his 40th birthday party, which was fun to do, by the way. The Blue Man Group, that was just great having him there. And all that messy paint and stuff. But it was to keep him, although at times I think in the storyline he might have seemed a little bit like, little wacky. In essence, he's probably of the guys the most stable. So I think it was quite a, I hope I'm not giving away spoilers, but quite a shock going down to find that, he transitions, he dies. But stability, so chinos, collared shirts, t-shirts, kept him very basic. Because I think his character was so driven to he's a workhorse. That's the difference. So Gordon was the workhorse of the company, and Joe was the idealist. That's kind of what I think I tried to build on in terms of how I would dress them.
Mm.
So the workhorse, he's in chinos and he's a plaid shirt, and the idealist is in a John Barbados shirt and he's down in the basement and he doesn't want to come up for 3 years. And he's even being idealistic about Cameron.
Yeah. I have another Gordon question, but you just mentioned Blue Man Group. Did you dress them or did they come in just being Blue Man Group?
They came in being Blue Man Group, and they do that whole thing. We didn't even, they do it incognito. I don't know how they got that thing on that vinyl thing on their faces, everything. They showed up and then all of a sudden there they were. So that was their own, yeah.
They did their own process.
Can I see how you get the, nope. Yeah. trade secrets,
proprietary information. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Well, okay, let's talk about that. So fascinating. Cracks me up. Let's talk a little bit about the episode after the one where Gordon dies, which is 408 Goodwill, because that episode is framed by scenes from the 70s. with
I
just
love
Donna and
that.
Gordon.
Yes,
Talk to me about
because
that episode and working on those 70 scenes.
I love that because there's nothing makes me happier than to do um, period, whether it's period within our lifetimes, because fashion really, really changes, or period way before us or way before us. So I had a great time. I did a lot of vintage shopping, and the clothes that you see are absolutely authentic to the time. We dug them up, we found them, we made sure they could hold up to the rigors of days of shooting in television. So that's what we did. And yeah, like the little moo thing, I remember that was fun. And that brown and ivory, I think it was beige shirt, and everything down to the shoes, everything was of the period. Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant. And all for one episode, really. I mean, it's a lot to try to build
Mm-hmm.
that out for one
Yeah.
episode.
And that stuff's hard to find. I mean, it's hard to find vintage clothes that will, like I said before, will hold up to the rigors of shooting, and also that fit the actor. And for menswear, it's even harder because women will save their clothes, but men really don't. So it's in terms of like the nuts and bolts of trying to find period pieces, it's tricky. But we got just enough, and Atlanta was a great resources. I was really digging through. Look, if I could have gotten access to your grandmother's closet, I would have been in there.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about a couple other characters we haven't addressed. So, in season 4, we've got Boz and Diane. Boz is having some financial troubles at the start, but we eventually get those two characters to a place where they're really both looking to retire. They seem to have very different priorities now than they did in prior seasons. How did you reflect that in what they wore?
Well, I think for Boz definitely was to keep him sort of down home. Look, in reality, he probably would have been just happy on a ranch, you know, uh, being on having a boat that eventually we realized that he really couldn't afford. And his wife, yeah, they were definitely having two different ideas of what retirement or just how they were going to move on with their lives. So I kept Annabelle very skittish, very sophisticated, and Boz was very kind of homespun. And it's very interesting because they were such opposites, but they were, opposites attract anyway. So there you go. But yeah, just kept him in his sport jackets, his cowboy boots, just how if he wasn't burdened with this business, I dressed him as if he wasn't burdened with the business. And I dressed her as if she wanted the business to be as big, as big as he wanted it in his dream. So that was basically kind of having that dichotomy of these two individuals. So he was, down on a ranch, and she was very, uptown. She's uptown girl.
Absolutely. Most of the characters in this show, of course, are adults, but you've got a couple kids to dress as well. We've got a 14-year-old Joni. We've got a preteen Haley. So, what style decisions were you able to make with them now that you're tapping into the next generation in the 90s?
Again, a lot of research and looking at what kids were wearing then. And also, I think at that time, kids were also reflecting their own personalities. And Joni, brilliant, forward thinking, kind of a cut of the cloth of her mom. It's almost like she was at her mom and her sister was like her dad. They had their own, I think, microcosm or mirroring their parents' conflicts, because that's what happens in families. And sometimes children emulate and they take sides and they imprint without even knowing that they're picking up on any uncertainties that they're finding within their own family dynamic. And I think that's basically, it hit Haley more than I think it hit Joni. But when you look at the both of them, they were absolutely, I gave them a rebellious style. They both were rebelling against whatever it is was going on with their parents. So Catherine Newton's character, I started getting her like punk and tough and just, grungy, because that was what was beginning to happen in that time period. And then for Susanna, it's like this uncertainty. Which way is she going to sway? She's obviously, struggling with what she's I don't think she was even quite sure of, was it a gender identity? Do I like boys? Do I like girls? What? And so she tries to get into this middle. I started putting her in a kind of a middle stream of style of clothing that's neither feminine or directly masculine, coveralls, t-shirts, and very no pretty dresses. That kind of stuff just kind of went away very, very quickly, because that was definitely not the type of person she was really evolving into. So we did a little bit of trying to sell the confusion that's going on in her mind. You want to put a little of that into styling her, into, just kind of making everything seem a little bit off. Whereas Catherine's look is definitely direct rebelliousness and pushback of the time, because back then it was grunge.
Yeah. I also like, and I imagine this was a scripted choice because it appears in a number of different ways in the episode, but Joni wearing that Shonen Knife shirt early on in season 4, and and then we're going to hear a Shonen Knife song. But that Cam was in Japan all this time, and you feel like Joni kind of idolized Cam. So yes. I wonder if there's a little bit of influence coming there too,
Sure. I mean, that's also another example of a department that you might think I wouldn't have much contact with, was the music department. And, did my shirt inspire him, or did his music inspire I'm not quite sure, but obviously there was a cross, interconnection there. So that, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You also had an entire bullpen to dress, actually a couple times, both with Calnecht and also with Comet, which couldn't be two more different bullpens. How did you approach this volume of work?
Well, one of the things that was good about it is that we had, in each of those bullpens, we had some core characters. So I kind of focused on them because they had lines. You're going to be seeing them over and over again. So that was was interesting. And we used a lot of local Atlanta actors, and they kind of brought their own. They brought their own style. They brought, when an actor comes into my fitting room, regardless of whether they're, number 1 on the call sheet or number 35 on the call sheet, I do take their personality and what they bring to the show, which is obviously one of the reasons why they were cast, and I start to build on that. Even if they just have a few lines, or you see them in the back, going from desk to desk, that's what I do. And they're very carefully cast to fit each of those bullpens. So it wasn't too hard to do.
Okay.
And also to get that kind of eclectic, because another important thing to note, that this was the beginning of office dress codes being just totally ripped apart, and really going away from suit and tie to short sleeve shirts, short skirt, just about the beginning of really, really relaxing and rejecting business dress codes, especially in, in the silicone space and in the digital space. So that was like a nice jump start to show that this was going to happen. It was beginning to happen. And when you think of how, hardly anybody wears a full suit to work anymore in the office environment. And that's the beginning. That was the germ of that changing, that informality in the office space.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's a fun observation to make for, how else that might have influenced those scenes too. So when you think about your work on season 4, what stands out to you as the biggest challenge that you had with outfitting a character, maybe for a specific scene? And what stands out to you as your proudest moment?
The biggest challenge, I would say, especially when you are coming in to design a show that has already been established, is to make your own mark, but not to make your mark so off the track that it throws either the actor's impression of what their character is. You have to find that and pick up that thread and then infuse your own design style or direction, of course, with input from from the creators of the show. So you want to come up with something fresh, but you don't want it to be so fresh that it's not recognizable to the viewer or it feels uncomfortable to the actor, because they've spent 3 years plus developing that particular character that they play. So you have to come and sort of like ensconce yourself into that world and then throw some new light on it. So that probably, I would say, overall is a challenge. It's like, make it fresh, but make it seamless. So that, I think, would be probably a reasonable answer for a challenge. If you're starting off with the show from the very, very beginning, and I was doing season 1, then I have a wider design plate to work with. So when you just have that end piece, it's exciting, don't get me wrong, absolutely exciting, and exciting to come in and do like little twists and turns, and of course you're going to have new episodes and you have new arcs, but that, I think, is something that you have to really pull out everything in your toolbox to make it all fit. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You have to find the corners and the pieces and the center.
That's a fun metaphor. Were there any proudest moments for you?
Yes. The day we did the photo shoot, because on the gallery photo shoot was one of those rare days when all the actors are photographed in, because you have so many different A stories and B stories, right? So the day of the gallery photo shoot, I thought it was so exciting, that shot that they did in the office environment, and Carrie's just like popping that, I think it was that red and white skirt, and then you see Boz in his little tweed sports jacket, and you actually, I felt so good about that, because right there in that composite portrait for the poster, you could see the individuality of each of those characters all at once. And I felt very, very good about that.
Oh, this is amazing. It's been so fun to hear you talk about this show, but is there anything that you've worked on since Halt and Catch Fire, or that you're working on now, that you can talk about, that you wanted to share with us?
Sure. Okay. So, so after Halt and Catch Fire, I went back to do the remaining seasons of Better Call Saul, which ran 6 seasons. That was just 6 seasons, and that was just really wonderful. And then you got a little bit of COVID in there, and writer strike in there, and all of those interruptions that we've had in our industry. But last year, 2022 and 23, I was in the UK, and I did something very different from what I normally do, not contemporary television at all. It was season 1 of The Acolyte, Star Wars. And that was pretty awesome. It's airing now on Disney Plus. So, yeah. And now I'm back in Albuquerque and I am working on Vince Gilligan's 3rd show in the early beginnings. And that's all I can say about that.
That's okay. We won't ask you more, but we're going to be on the lookout for it. That's so exciting.
Yes,
It's always fun.
yes.
I'm always happy to hear about people who are actively doing work right now, because the more you all are working, the more we're going to get to see on our screens. So
Thank you. Thank you.
It's great news. Well, thank you so much for carving some time out and joining me to talk about this show. It's been such a blast hearing from your perspective about what season 4 was like.
Melissa, thank you so much too. And it's really nice to kind of go back and revisit that. And I really had a wonderful time deciding Halt and Catch Fire season 4.
Yeah. Hang out for just an extra couple minutes after we say goodbye to everyone. But to those of you who are watching this, please go out there and watch Halt and Catch Fire.
Yes.
Bye, everybody.